I haven't gotten any negative feedback, but when I get feedback of other jokes, I'm going to take the suggestions. So, and thank you for your joke today. Roland, thank you for your joke as well. So with that, we're a little ahead of schedule, so that's good. I get to turn it over to Whitney Swander, who's the Interim Executive Director of United Way Central Oregon. This is an organization I'm somewhat familiar with. I've supported over the past in the national way, and I think we've heard from you before, or somebody from your organization, so looking forward to have you back. So without further ado, I will yield the floor to you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to fill my water really quickly.
Absolutely.
Before I have that.
Okay, well, Whitney, welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Am I supposed to use, is this on?
No.
Okay.
It
No,
can be on.
I would
one.
like it not to be. So
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure if I was speaking into the microphone or
No.
not. I really want to thank you all for the invitation to come and talk a little bit about the United Way of Central Oregon, as Chris shared. Whitney Swander. I have been serving as the Interim Executive Director for almost a year with United Way of Central Oregon. And if you know anything about interim service, a year is a really long time to be an interim leader. And when I accepted this invitation earlier this year, I really thought that I would be coming and talking about a new chapter of organizational development. But for those of you that come from corporate backgrounds, you know that sometimes those things get delayed. And so I'm going to talk about everything that is true, and know that later this year, you should invite someone else to come back from the United Way and talk about the work in the future. So that's the prelude. A little bit about me. I grew up here in Central Oregon. I feel like I'm increasingly one of the few people who had the privilege to see this place 30, 40 years ago when it looked very different. But I love it here. And I moved back with my partner about 8 years ago after we had lived on multiple continents and had the opportunity to explore the world. We have 3 fur children, Sancho, Blanco, and Lola. And we like gardening and weightlifting, and that's kind of what we do. I wanted to bring a little personal in because I know that you all care a lot about each other's personal lives as humans, and that's an important way you connect with the community. So up on the screen, there are 3 words: respond, recover, reimagine, rebuild. And this is a campaign that the National United Way developed in 2022 to really guide where the organization is headed. That this really is our role forever has been to respond to local needs, to address disasters or crises and help communities recover, and to imagine what future community organization and programs could look like. And United Way of Central Oregon isn't really different in that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the history of our community impact work has been, again with the foreshadowing that the future will continue to evolve and change. But I think that these things will always remain true about how United Ways work and operate. So the national call to action for the United Way is this notion of living united. And living united really recognizes, and I think in what I've seen just today here at Kiwanis, it really recognizes that each of us have something to contribute to our community, and it's our responsibility to find that. And so we show up in the ways that we can. Some of us give our time, some of us give our talents, some of us give our resources, some of us find other ways to contribute. And that really is the call from United Way national community, is to come together. And that we're going to solve the issues and challenges facing our communities when we do that together. United Ways have been around in the country for about 125 years. There's a pretty fun origin story that I don't have enough history with this organization to tell really well, but it sounds like a bad joke. It involves a rabbi, a pastor, and I think an elected city council person who came together and said, we have a different way. We should be working together. And that really is the basis of how United Ways operate. Here in Central Oregon, The first chapter of the United Way was founded in 1953, which means that this year is the 70th year of the United Way in Bend, technically. But United Ways, and again, the history and the organization is very distinct. It's had a presence across the really Tri-County area for many decades. And the United Way of Bend in the 90s became the United Way of Bend Redmond as it merged with a chapter here in Redmond. Later in the early 2000s, it became the United Way of Deschutes County when it merged with work that was happening in Sisters. And then in 2020, we became the United Way of Central Oregon as there were changes in the United Fund committees in Crook County and Jefferson County. And we also made that change to reflect the way that the partners that we were working with in Central Oregon were operating on a more tri-county and system level approach. So that's kind of the background of what the organization is. I think something that's really unique about the United Way is historically its role has been to bring forth the power of personal philanthropy. And I think, a lot of generations, they make their first charitable donation through a United Way, either at a workplace campaign, as an individual donor, a mailer that gets sent to their home, at an event, etc. I'm curious, I know someone said that a couple people said that they were United Way supporters, but I'm curious who here has contributed to a United Way campaign? A lot of us, right? How many in a workplace campaign? Yeah. So United Ways have this very interesting history of creating relationships with different parts of our community and really creating this message of individual giving, individual philanthropy, and bringing people forward. Some of the changes that are driving the future of United Ways are related to, I think, the really successful legacies that United Ways have helped build, which is personal philanthropy is important, and having direct relationships with the organizations and the causes that you care about should be a driving part of your life. And I think you all at Kiwanis know that very well. So the mission of United Way of Central Oregon has been, for many years, to bring together caring people to improve lives. And over the last few years, we have added on to this mission because we have felt it's been really important to be specific about what it means to live better lives. And that has focused around addressing trauma and ACEs for kids. So we talk about having a resilient community, and also looking at the historical impacts on different communities, whether that is race, gender, ability, etc. And so having a broader mission that says more about why we're bringing people together. We're bringing people together for better, more resilient, and equitable communities here in Central Oregon. National United Ways have convened and mobilized efforts around 3 pillars that we believe lead to better lives. And those are access to health, access to education, and financial security. So when we look at education, health, and financial security and what's happening in our communities, the issues facing Central Oregon are very complex. So I pulled just four statistics, and I could pull many more, but these issues are really complex. So 30% of working households in Central Oregon are struggling to make ends meet. That means paying their rent, affording childcare, having adequate nutrition, clothing, etc. And for families of color and for families that live in rural communities, the percent of folks that are struggling are even higher. Based on the most recent point in time count, which occurred this year in January, at least 1,650 people are experiencing homelessness on any given night. I heard you speak to the safe parking program here in Redmond, and there's a lot of movement around this in our community. But again, these are systemic issues. They aren't just the actual literal effect of being homeless, but all of the conditions that lead up to people being in crisis or unstable. 1 in 4 students, high school students in Deschutes, Crook, and Jefferson County reported that they were unable to get the mental health services that they needed and that they were seeking. This was on the Oregon student health survey in 2020. We're awaiting the 2022 data right now, but these numbers have held pretty strong for about a decade. So we know that that kids either can't find, or there isn't enough, or they have barriers to getting the help that they need to thrive. And finally, 1 in 3 families can't find childcare that meets their needs or their budget. And this was from some systems analysis that the Early Learning Hub of Central Oregon did here in Central Oregon. So no one organization or one funding stream is going to address these types of complex problems. And really the work of United Ways has been and will continue to be at a nexus where we can help mobilize partners to help build solutions, help build responses to these complex issues. And we know that this work doesn't happen through, as I said, one organization, but it happens through as many people as possible knowing about what their role could be and working through that people-powered philanthropy that United Ways have been known to do. So when we talk about our partners and the unique place that United Way of Central Oregon sits, we talk about our donors or our community partners in these ways. Our individual donors. We have thousands of people who donate annually to the United Way of Central Oregon, some through a one-time gift of $25 a year, other people who ask us to steward a $100,000 gift through our organizations and ask continuously what they can do. Our phone rings continuously with folks who are wanting to know more about this issue that they heard on the news and what could they do, who could we recommend, where should they be directing their attention or being engaged. Similarly, we work with hundreds of local businesses and corporations and receive donations, pass those dollars along, and also help mobilize donors, volunteers, et cetera, to support them. We work with about 50 workplaces. For those of you that raised your hand, if you were in one of those workplace campaigns, we have about 50 remaining workplace campaigns. Nationally, this is a model that is declining. I'll just say that outright. And the same reason that personal philanthropy is on the rise, most people know where they want to donate. They don't need someone to come to their workplace anymore and tell them why philanthropy is important. They know it's a part of their lives. And then we work with and through a network of about 150 nonprofits across our region and a number of regional partner organizations like Better Together, which is located here in Redmond, and the Central Oregon Health Council, just to name a few. So how do we accomplish our mission? So, fundraising has, as I mentioned, has been a long-standing core competency and primary activity for the United Way of Central Oregon. Like many nonprofits, that's not unique. However, the difference of our fundraising is we attempt to keep our operations lean and so that we're able to pass as much money back into the community through investments as possible. So just this year in 2022, 2023, we have made grants to 37 organizations that are just under $400,000 so far. And we do this primarily through two programs, two RFPs. One, the Community Impact Grants, which nonprofits know, and they're always asking, when is this happening? What are the priorities? So as a staff and a board, we set priorities every year based on what we're hearing in the community. From those tables that we sit at, what are the priorities and where can we provide some additional resources? The United Way, we try not to put too many strings around our grants that we receive because we recognize that a lot of nonprofits are getting a lot of foundation and state or federal grants that have so many reporting requirements, and it's really nice to have some flexible funds to help them meet their mission without creating more burden and more work. So these are small grants. They usually range between $5,000 and $20,000, but they provide those special ways that people can innovate and create new ways to operate. This year, our priorities in response to needs that we were hearing still coming out of the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic was an emphasis on positive mental health and wellness. I'm sorry, I wear a continuous glucose monitor, and for some reason I'm just like, it won't stop talking to me. So I'm not trying to be rude and it won't let me turn it off. Apologies.
You're good.
I'm good, yes, thank you. So positive mental health and resilience was one of, and well-being, I guess, was one of the areas. The second was housing stability, so an emphasis not on addressing homelessness, but keeping families and individuals housed and in their homes. And then finally, culturally specific services, so programs that are for and by local communities, diverse communities. The second RFP that we run annually is the Emergency Food and Shelter Program. We receive some federal dollars and also an allocation from Deschutes County, and we provide grants specifically around shelter access and food access, and those grants were just made earlier this year. The other thing I'll just note is, again, while we try to keep our reporting requirements to be not so burdensome on folks, when we look at all of the organizations that we serve, that we fund, and the folks that they serve, for folks who are United Way partners, they're touching about 1 in 4 Central Oregonians. So this has a really big impact, and we know that we're touching a great portion of folks in need in our community. The other way that we catalyze investment in the community is through our donors. So a service that the United Way has provided for many years, like I mentioned, we have a donor who collectively over the year, we generally steward about $100,000 of their charitable donations, is we receive and distribute funds on behalf of donors. And this results in about $180,000 of funds that are going into our community. And our donors tell us where they want those funds to go, and we pass those along. Yes, Chris.
Sorry, I know you probably have time for questions later, but is that, I guess, what vehicle? Are they giving you an outright check? Is it like a charitable relief trust? Is it an annuity? What is that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Sometimes they're checks, but we are one of the few charitable organizations in the region that can receive stocks and annuities and other things that we then can transfer those, turn them into cash, and give them to organizations.
Okay.
So we get disbursements from IRAs. We get all sorts of interesting things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great question. So we send checks to close to 200 organizations every year on behalf of donors, and I just pulled, there's so many checks, but these are just some examples of folks that weren't on that other page, but I thought are either here in Redmond, or they're touching on issues of children and families. So just a few examples. The other way that we work, and I think most people are familiar with United Way from that fundraising and grant making perspective, because that has been the history of the organization, is the thermometer and where are we on the campaign goal, and coming to workplaces and press releases about grants that are being made. But the other way that United Ways work, and I think it's overlooked work because we're unfortunately very quiet about it, is we do this work called convening for action. Convening is just a really fancy word for meeting, but it is purposeful meeting. It's meeting people to share critical information and use that information for action. So I wanted to provide a few tangibles about what that convening for collective action has looked like for Central Oregon, and some of the results of that. So one thing we've done for a number of years, probably the last 25 years, is incubating programs that fill unmet needs. So I believe it was last week you all had Thrive Central Oregon here, right? Yeah. So I pulled them out purposefully because I saw that on your website. So Thrive was born at the United Way of Central Oregon. And I don't know if they share that proudly, and that's really okay. But in I think it was about 2012, 2013, before they were a formal nonprofit, Sarah, their director, came to the United Way and said, there's this model happening all over the country where social workers are going to the places where people who are seeking resources are, and they're helping them navigate that. And these are billable services, and this could be something, but I don't know how to build it. And so the United Way walked with Traces over a 3 or 4 year period, where at that time, Traces was a program of the United Way of Central Oregon. There was director to director mentorship. There was knowledge sharing about how you build a board, about how you, develop your internal systems and controls. And Thrive is now a beautiful organization with 20 plus staff members that is doing really incredible work and is seen as really the experts in our region around service navigation and case management. And we're really proud that was birthed at the United Way of Central Oregon. Similarly, there's a network of free tax preparation capacity in our region that, again, had its roots here in Central Oregon at the United Way of Central Oregon. And the way that our board has looked at this is, incubating and filling these unmet needs so that we have greater capacity, not necessarily competition, but specialization, and really strong nonprofits. Building our sector is how we talk about it. As you know, a nonprofit that supports nonprofits is core to how we work. We've also launched collective initiatives that address root causes. Alan asked if we were still working in ACEs. Are other folks familiar with TRACES, trauma resilience, adverse childhood experiences type work? I'm just going to scan. Not that important to go into the details, but there was some very seminal work in the early 2000s about how the effects of childhood trauma, adverse childhood experiences affect the development of children's brains, and then essentially are connected to just about every adult outcome we can think of. And so addressing the various roots of trauma, which include poverty. It's not just abuse, et cetera. It can be witnessing a death, drug and alcohol abuse in a home. The roots are deep, and it's really easy to sort of say we just have these societal problems, but how do we get to the root of them? So the United Way spent many years building up a set of knowledge locally around the effects of trauma and ACEs, and that the antidote to this is really focused on resilience, building the personal capacity to community capacity to respond to really traumatic events. And I'm happy to report that again, in the space of how the United Way of Central Oregon has worked, most of our regional school districts have programs now that are focused on addressing these ACEs and how these behaviors show up in kids from a place that is rooted in science, that is rooted in best practices, and is really attending to how we support kids to thrive long term, not just manage behaviors, but really support how they can be thriving adults. This has permeated into our health sector, and they're looking differently about how important things like belonging is. And before the United Way really birthed and brought this work of TRACES, we weren't talking about belonging as a critical core place, people having community, feeling like they know people, that they are known, that they have a group that supports them, that they know where to go in the community, etc. So I won't belabor this, but it's beautiful work, and we're really proud of that. And then more immediately, we respond to urgent needs by standing in the gap. And again, quiet work that the United Way of Central Oregon doesn't want to capitalize on tragedy or trauma, but I'm sure many of you heard about the shooting that occurred at the Safeway, the East Bend Safeway last fall. Immediately following that, there was a need to bring some dollars into our community, one, to support people who had been affected by that trauma. We continue to help people navigate the financial fallout of that really traumatic event. But also, this exposed some lack of capacity in our community around social media monitoring that someone has to pay for, right? And so the United Way, along with our partners at the Deschutes County DA's office, brought some funds in to have some immediate training and to get that monitoring happening very quickly. So that we're looking at the longer term ways that we keep those resources in place, because they're the best things that we know right now that prevents this type of mass tragedy in our communities. The last thing, I'm sorry I probably talked way longer than I was expecting here. The last thing we do, or that we've been doing recently, is sharing information to ACT. And I wanted to give you just an introduction to this tool called United for ALICE. So ALICE, another acronym, stands for Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed. ALICE households are, these represent a growing number of families in our communities who are unable to afford the basics of housing, childcare, food, transportation, health, technology, etc. These are workers that often struggle to keep their households going while they are indispensable to keeping our communities going. And I think we learned a lot more about this population through the pandemic as they got a name. They were our essential workers. But when we look at the data in our region, and there's a research group that's connected with United Way out of North New Jersey that has developed a research center around ALICE. They're able to really look at local data along with census data and determine who's not making it in our community. So they've developed these survival budgets, and I tend to quibble with the line items, but I think the full amounts are pretty good, and I think that a lot of these families are making month-to-month trade-offs. So these are folks who are above the federal poverty line, but below what the cost of living is here. They make a wage that's less than the cost of living is. And they're largely invisible in government in a lot of ways because they are employed, and they're doing all the quote-unquote right things in our community, in our society, but aren't necessarily able to live a good, dignified life. I could talk about this for hours, but I just wanted to introduce you to it. And I can share these with Ron or whoever afterwards, but wanted to share that these are things that your club, if you wanted to use some of this data, could access. There's state reports, there's county reports, and there's data right down to the city, zip code, and census designated place for some things. So you can get some Redmond-specific data. The Deschutes County data is very good. And some of the ways that we've been advocating for this is we took this information to the Central Oregon Health Council and some of their work groups that are responsible for making millions of dollars of investments through their work. And there was an ALICE listening session project that wrapped up earlier this year where they went out and talked to folks who are in this ALICE community. They are above the federal poverty line, but they're below a wage to really afford living in communities. And there are some Redmond-specific data if you want to go into that. And it's really heartfelt, right? These weren't huge samples, but as someone with a background in research, the summaries are true for the people that responded. So I would encourage, I can share these, I would encourage you all to look at that. And that is who the United Way of Central Oregon has been and will continue to be, and will probably continue to grow from there. So I'm happy to answer questions. Yes, Ann.
Why are you not staying on as the director? You're doing a great job, obviously.
Oh, thank you. It is not my work long term. I'll just say that. But yes, thank you. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, Alan.
Well, when you talked about ACEs, now I understand what's going on with Clarence Thomas, because I watched that show and he's got problems. But I wanted to talk about what I would think Chris at Edward D. Jones, well, I'm going to go see my financial advisor sometime this month, and they're going to tell me, oh, you got to take money out of your IRA and you can donate it to a nonprofit. Well, okay, then I go down that route and it's like, well, do I pick NPR? What do I pick? If I could pick you, and then I could go shop at your website and go, oh, I'm going to put $25 here, $100 there, and something else, then Bev, who likes Jericho Road, she could put money towards that, and I, who like Kiwanis, could put money towards that, and it would just give me an opportunity to spread my money around, and I don't have to worry about how that all goes from my IRA to the group.
Yes, that is a way. A core group of our longstanding donors use the United Way services for that, and we do request a contribution to the United Way's work for that as well. But yes, you can do that. Yes. So
I was surprised to hear that social media monitoring is going on. Could you elaborate on what that is?
Yeah, there is Deschutes County has a contract with the company, I believe it's called Safer Schools Together. I could be wrong on that. but there is some proprietary processes to look for keywords and patterns of behavior that have been known to occur prior to mass shootings or school shooting events.
Huh. Okay.
It is not a, it's a, the people who get that information, it is used for then ongoing threat assessment work.
Who gets the information?
A threat assessment team. And there's adult threat assessment and youth threat assessment. They're folks that are comprised of law enforcement, youth serving, or adult serving folks. It's kind of, that is kind of out of my my sphere of influence, but where the United Way has partnered, and I think this is pretty innovative, is actually we've come with some additional resources. We set some funds aside as well that offer resources to people who are potentially in crisis. So the technical term is around violence grievance mitigation. So if people have a grievance that is considered credible that could result in some sort of violent activity, then we have some resources that could help actually provide something positive for that.
So what do we do? Law enforcement goes out to these people, and what action do they take? Just here's some resources if we need them?
No, again, not my field of expertise there, but there's a across the country there are these networks of threat assessment folks, and I think law enforcement only is involved when law enforcement needs to be involved. Sometimes the most appropriate person to connect with someone is a counselor or a teacher or someone from a youth serving space or the equivalent for adults. Yeah.
So if I donate $100 to United Way and I'd say I'd like some of my money to go to a couple of these things I like,
Yeah.
how much of that money hits the ground? $100 or $95?
Like 90.
90? Okay.
That's good.
Yeah.
What might be the primary reason someone would donate to United Way rather than a specific nonprofit?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think United Ways are continuing to make the value case for that as direct giving becomes so easy and the preference. So I think the people who remain loyal to the United Way in our work are people who are really inspired by that collective action work, because that is really the sweet spot of the United Way, and knowing that acting collectively as opposed to alone has the potential to make more impact that way. So does that answer your question?
I think so.
Yeah. Yes.
So I have to share a story. The first time I encountered United Way in 1979, I had just gone to work for Spare Univac, and they called all employees meeting in the big cafeteria, and security people stood at all but one of the doors, and all the managers of the company stood at the only available exit. And they stood there like this while we listened to your presentation and handed out the sign-up forms. You know, they were going for 100%.
Was this Intel?
I assume you don't work like that
Was this
anymore.
Intel?
What?
Was
No,
this
it was
at Intel?
Spare Univac.
Okay.
But
I've heard similar things about Intel.
Yeah.
No, it is very, I've heard from other folks in the community similar stories about the pressure campaigns of the 70s and 80s. I think I mentioned workplace campaigns are not the primary drivers of our revenue anymore. I think they're increasingly those partnership opportunities, right? So it's getting in front of folks so people understand needs in our community that perhaps they didn't know about. We did a lot of education for a number of years about ACEs and trauma, and we found that was, if it resulted in some donations to support that work, that was great. But the pitch was much more educational to say, these things show up probably in your own workplace, right? And bringing these here can allow you to have conversations about what can help you thrive. We also find that a lot of our workplaces now are shifting to that more awareness of philanthropy, awareness of what's happening in the community. I'll call out Bigfoot Beverage, for example. They're one of our workplace partners, and they make it a whole week of fun. So I did presentations to their staff at like 4:35, like before folks were getting on trucks to go out and work in the trade. But they also had a chili cook-off, and they crown a chili cook-off campaign person of the year. They have raffles, and any dollar that is donated goes into the campaign and then is matched by the company. So, I think it's very different. And increasingly, as it's pretty rare to actually get people in workplaces in a room together anymore. So increasingly, it is a video that's posted to a Slack channel, right? An interview with, we did an interview with Selco that way. 5 minutes that shared what this was about, and here's how you can contribute. Yeah. Good question.
I can remember, this is something, this reminds me that I've forgotten, a little role I played with my company probably in the 70s and 80s when I was living in Milton Freewater. The company offered, was riding United Way, and they, as I remember, because it was such a long time ago, but I offered to be the engineering department mentor to this, and each department had a representative, and the idea was for me to
be the pitch. Did you give the pitch? Yeah.
Pitch donations by way of a payroll deduction to United Way. I forgot all about doing this.
The loaned executive program. There's a whole there was a whole model around this. That much of that is kind of in the past, because work has just changed, right? Work is very different.
We're old, Roland.
No, I will say I've participated in the last 5 years in something like that, and even within the last 10 years. So you're not that old or aged. Still relevant.
Chris's age when I did.
You must be old.
Welcome. Oh boy, look forward to it. So.
You were so good at this, I hope you would be a CEO somewhere.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Very good.
Thank you. Let me take your question.
Oh, I just want to ask you, if you were to have an ask for us, what would it be? What would we right now be able to do for you?
I want to say, we've been working with our partners at Connect Central Oregon. Are they on your list of folks to engage? Maybe? No. So Connect Central Oregon, they took on Volunteer Connect a few years ago. And one of the things that we have been doing is wanting to bring back some bigger volunteer days, some days that bring people out into the community in a coordinated way. And I know you all do a lot of service. I'm really excited about the garden work that's happening, but we brought back this year on Martin Luther King Jr. Day in January, a day of service in partnership, and we had about 370 folks around, mostly Bend and Redmond that came out, which I thought, we haven't done an MLK Day event since 2019, so for the first day back, to have almost 400 people come out was great. So I would say that would be helping. It is a big lift to get those volunteer days happening, but I think that there's a lot of energy that comes from it, and this renewed sense that we're kind of in this together, and that I think that would be a great thing for Kiwanis to help mobilize. You got signups going.
Yeah, I think we actually we did make that announcement, but I think we got that information pretty late.
Pretty late, yeah. Yes.
And so if that continues, that's something that's easy to just show up and have a body. And what was neat about it, there was like, I think 4 or 5. There was like three or 4 in Redmond. Not as many in Redmond as there were in Bend. But it was like all you have to do is show up between this time. It's kid friendly. It's family friendly. It's not kid friendly. So, yeah.
And I would even invite, if you all have service projects that you're wanting to elevate and bring exposure to your club and the work that you do, doing that in partnership with those days of service, I think could be really powerful. Because then we could get more community members out to do what you all are doing around food bags, or I was listening to everyone talking.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
Good question.
Well, thank you everyone so much for
Yes,
the
thank you.
invitation. I'll stick
Picture.
around if anyone wants to talk.
We have just a little thank you gift. It's should be Western Permit. So
Thank you.
Make a contribution.
Thank you, yeah.
all right, with that, we will go ahead and dismiss.
Okay.